My name is Gabriel Rosenstock. I'm an Irish language writer and translator. I'm a bilingual writer, in fact. I write also in English. And I'm a rather prolific translator, and the most recent titles are in fact 3 Indian poets that I've translated into Irish, which is sometimes called Gaelic, the indigenous language of Ireland before English came at all. In fact, before English, if you like, was invented, because it's one of the oldest literary, it is the oldest literary language in Europe, in fact, the Irish language. And the 3 poets that I've translated, one is Dilip Javeri, who is a medical doctor living in Mumbai, distinguished poet. Hemant Divat, who is also living in Mumbai, writes in Marathi. Dilip also writes in Gujarati. And Satchit Anandan was a very well-known poet from Kerala who writes in his own language, Malayalam. And it's been a great joy and a privilege to translate these poets, because I would say, apart from Tagore, whom I've also translated into Irish, not many Indian poets are known in Ireland or revered in Ireland as they should be. And I'd like to change that. And I hope that this is the beginning, perhaps, of a series in which I will introduce readers of Irish to the great cultural and linguistic diversity that we find here in the Indian subcontinent. No, I use English as a bridge language, but there's always the intention not to simply translate a crib, but as it were to experience something of the inspiration that drove these poets to pen, to write their poems in the first place, to reimagine the substance, the dream, the vision, the inspiration that goes into a poem, and to recreate it in such a way that it reads as an interesting poem and something that's alive in its new form in the Irish language. And one of the challenges facing, I think, literary translators is, especially someone like myself writing in a minority language, a language, in fact, that's endangered, that by introducing new themes and new writers and new voices into that language, somehow you extend the range of that language, the vocabulary, the tone, the colour, sometimes the forms and the structures. And introducing these other voices, purists would say, don't do that, stick to tradition and stick to your own parameters. But that's not the way I feel. I feel that throughout the ages, literature has been enriched by translations, and also throughout the ages there has been an enrichment from the contact between different civilizations, broadly speaking, East and West in this case. But my language is a Celtic language, but it's also part of the great Indo-European pool of languages. So there are not so many differences really. There are not so many cultural. There are more cultural comparisons we can make between the 2 civilizations than those, if you like, differences which make us different. So there have been many studies by scholars, in fact, of one particular great Irish scholar called Miles Dillon has written papers relating to the Hindu and the Celt and what they might have in common in terms of their laws, sometimes of their architectural remains, but more specifically about the nature of their epics and so on, and how prose and poetry can sometimes interweave in epics. And there are also certain linguistic points of interest between our 2 cultures as well. Our sacred river is the Boyne, and that is linguistically cognate with Govinda, another name for Krishna. So there's a mixture there in the ancient and in the modern worlds where there are points of contact that we must continue to find. I believe that just as the brain has two hemispheres and that one is necessary to balance the other, so in our worlds as well. I think East needs West as much as West needs East, and this is the way it should be. And to make a meaningful contact between different civilizations on the ground of literature and creative writing is, I think, something worth doing. Well, there is no such language today as Celtic, but Irish or Gaelic is part of a loosely grouped Celtic family of languages that would include Welsh, which is still very much alive, but also some might say endangered, Cornish, which died out, and they're trying to revive it, Manx, which is a type of Gaelic spoken on the Isle of Man. It died out, they're trying to revive it, I should say, and Scots Gaelic. Breton is also considered to be a Celtic language, also very endangered. So we're living in a world where, in fact, there are many, many endangered languages. And one thing I like about festivals such as Hyderabad, that they include a certain homage and respect for minority languages and threatened languages, the culture of the tribals and so on. That's hugely important because roots, if they dry up, are very, very difficult to re-water again, and the whole plant can die. And I suppose you could say that many people today suffer from rootlessness. We live in a world where Anglo-American values are very strong, and where people think that, by writing, let's say, in English, that one is going to make more money or be more successful or be more fashionable. Well, that's not necessarily so at all, because really, who earns a successful living from writing 1 in a million, whatever language you're writing? That's writing in one particular language or another is not a guarantee of any type of success. And in the long run, artistic success is all that matters. Your own judgment of your work and the judgment of your peers.
What's the kind of readership that you already have in Irish language? Is there a huge young generation which reads in the language?
I'd like to say there is, but there isn't really. You see, Irish nearly died out, in fact. And it was only with the establishment of a free state, then a republic, that Irish achieved a kind of a national status again, and was included then as a core subject in schools. But I think we've learned that the school system alone is not sufficient to keep a language alive, that there are other sectors of society that must follow suit. I mean, that would include the church, for instance, though the church's power is also weakened in Ireland. But the church was largely anglicised as well in the past 150, 200 years. So, the business community, the commercial life and so on, if a language doesn't become part of many layers of public and social life, it's difficult to sustain on a private basis. So the communities where Irish as a first language has been spoken have been dwindling for the past 100 years or so, in spite of revival efforts. And there's also the problem, even within the small phalanx or corpus of readers and speakers of the language, that you have 3 different dialects, and people often read within their own preferred dialect and don't switch over to read in the neighbouring dialect, or in what you might call the standard forms of reading and writing. So I could say, as a literary community, that we're a very enthusiastic but very small and threatened group. Yeah. Well, as part of my stay here in Hyderabad, I will be conducting a haiku workshop with Kala Ramesh and K. Ramesh, and I'll be also reading original haiku. So you might say, well, haiku is a Japanese form. Why should an Irish person writing in Irish and English be interested in this form? Well, in fact, it's quite a universal form now. There are haiku clubs and haiku societies in 60 or so different countries around the world. And I write haiku in Irish and in English, and I've written 2 books about haiku as a way of life, published by Cambridge Scholars, publishing in the UK. One is called Haiku Enlightenment, and the other is called Haiku, the Gentle Art of Disappearing. And my own haiku in English, many of them translated from the original Irish, is called Where Light Begins. I'll be reading from extracts from these books and talking about these books. And haiku is also, in its own way, has proven in the past 100 years or so, certainly in the past 50 years, to be a type of universal language that a lot of people can relate to, and a lot of people can see as, I suppose, in our age of texting and minimalism, that it suits our culture today in many ways. And people in the 1950s and 1960s who were engaged in concrete poetry, they saw this age coming when minimalism would become very fashionable and very attractive for a lot of people for whom who have no time anymore to read a 600-page novel unless it's a blockbuster. So I'll be talking about haiku as, not everybody can be a poet, not everybody can be a painter or a composer of music, but I would say that anybody, really, who puts his or her mind to it, can become a writer of haiku. It's like riding a bicycle. You just have to get the knack. And if you learn it, if it clicks for you, this is something that you can learn. I'm confident that you can learn haiku if you have the desire to learn it, and you can perfect your technique over time if you're dedicated to it. And all art requires dedication, not a meaningless drudge of 8 hours a day, but actual passionate commitment. And in the various genres that I practice, lyrical poetry, fiction, haiku, translation, I wouldn't do it if I weren't passionate about it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't think that it sustained a vision of life that gives meaning and dignity and sense, makes sense. Making sense of one's life is what it's about, making sense of what you see and hear, what you feel, what you perceive, your relationships with yourself, with the world, with your family, with creation, with manifestation. All this is why an artist creates, yeah? And haiku is also a way of life in which you can celebrate simply the bliss of consciousness, the bliss of being aware, the bliss of being alive. Not always bliss. The moods as reflected in seasons, in the weather, in manifestations of nature, plant life, animal life, the clouds, the water, the elements. So haiku is also becomes very attractive for people with an ecological consciousness or a planetary consciousness, and people who realize that this planet, we were talking about languages being in danger earlier on. Well, we've become conscious not just of languages and cultures being endangered, but the very ground we walk on. I mean, the very air we breathe. We see, for the first time in human history, we see that, we've created a toxic environment, and what does progress mean anymore? Do we have to call a halt to so-called progress, because we can't go on as we have been going on? I mean, is there enough steel? Is there enough steel on the planet to make more cars? And yet, in India and in China and everywhere else, they want more cars, don't they? Can we afford to make more cars? And can we afford to make the air more poisonous? I don't know, but this much I know, that somebody who goes into a corner or sits under a tree and writes a haiku is not escaping into some fantasy world. He or she is confronting the world we live in a vital way, and if readers respond to this, you see, this is the problem. This is a problem that I think is widespread today. What is our response to literature? What is our response to the arts? Is there any response? I was talking to a teacher here in Hyderabad who was lecturing students who are specializing in technical subjects, who have never opened a book in their lives, who have never opened a book of poetry in their lives. This type of over-specialization can't be good. Can't be good for the future of mankind, because we need stories, we need poems, we need music, we need the plastic arts, the visual arts, not just to beautify the environment. Art isn't about prettification. It's, as I say, making sense of our dreams and making sense of our dreams for the future. And well, it saddens me to think that there are young men and women. It saddens me to know that there are young men and women out there who consider themselves to be on the path to success when they don't open a book. This is not possible, because if the book is closed, how can you enter into those realms which in the keynote address this morning were spoken of in terms of the mystery? You cannot live life successfully without encountering the mystery every day. And if you close your eyes and your ears to the arts, to creativity, I think you're blinding yourself to the possibility of mystery in your life. And this is tragic. And this is the tragedy of our educational philosophers, our educational administrators, and our departments of education, whether in India or in Ireland, who go down this path of over-specialization.